Our next type of graph is a pie chart, also sometimes known as a pie graph or a circle graph. It's a graphical display in which a circle is divided into sectors, and each sector represents the portion of the whole, i.e. a percentage. Now, almost always the variables are qualitative, which they are in this case, and the sectors should be labeled with categories and relative frequency. Now, the relative frequencies are usually given as percents most frequently for this type of graph. The graph should be two-dimensional. It should be flat. They should not have three-dimensional graphs. And if you're making these in StatCrunch, it's pretty straightforward. It's just graph and then pie chart. Okay, so let's look at this pie chart. This is real data about the share of NCAA student athletes in the US in 2024 by ethnicity. All right, so the first thing to note is there's a little sliver right here at the top. So we have the white, black, Hispanic, all right, two or more races, international, unknown, and Asian. And right there at the tippy top, there's a sliver that is unlabeled, which represents AIAN and NHPI. AIAN is American Indian Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander is the NHPI. So that is a very common abbreviations for those two groups, and they're often put together for data sets like this. So what percent of NCAA athletes are AIAN and NHPI? Well, that's a little bit tricky. So remember that this has to add up to 100%. So the total has to be 100%. Right? We have to have all sectors accounted for. So if we're going to find out what percent of NCAA athletes are in that group, we're going to have to figure out what everybody else adds up to and then take it away from 100. Okay, so that'll be our first mission. I'm going to take out Desmos and I'm going to add up 61.4 and 16 and 6.8 and so on. Okay, when I add up all the values that I have, so there's the white, black, Hispanic, Latino, and so on. I add up all those values, I get 99.2. By the way, you'll notice 16.0 and 6.0, you don't actually have to put 0.0 afterwards because 0 at the end of a decimal is just a placeholder. So you can just type 16 and 6. All right, so we get all the others add up to 99.2. So I'm going to make a note of that. So all the other categories add to 99.2%. Okay, so then to find out for AIAN and then NHPI, what we're going to do is we're going to take the 100% and we're going to subtract away what everybody else added up to, which is 99.2%. And that would make 0.8%, right? So if you take 100 and you subtract 99.2, you get 0.8%. Okay, so this is 0.8%. So this right here is that. Now, when I graphed this by computer, I actually didn't use StatCrunch, I used a different program. But when I graphed it with that other program, it did not label that section. Why? Well, it's a combination of a couple things. So what happened is right at the tippy top, and it's not very big. And so when that happened, it would have put the title for it up inside this title here for the whole graph, right? It didn't have space for it at the top. And it's also a very small number. So there was no space at the top because of the title, right? Because the title for the whole graph is sitting there. Oop, is there. I forgot my H. And also, it's a very small percentage. Right? It's a very small group. So it's easy to kind of just knock them out. And the computer program, literally, without even being told, it just got rid of them. It just put them away because it was such a small group and it wouldn't fit up here because the title was in the way. And so it just didn't do it. That happens sometimes, especially when you're working with computer programs. They don't have the ability sometimes to make the judgment calls we would make. do it. They just get rid of titles because they don't have space for them. Okay, now what percent of NCAA athletes are Black or Hispanic Latino? Now remember, in this class, or will mean to add. So we're going to add up the Black and Hispanic Latino. So that would be 16% plus 6.8%, which makes 22.8%. All right, now how many groups each account for more than 5% of NCAA total athletes? Okay, so in other words, how many of the categories are more than 5%? So let's start. Let's look over here. So these are smaller and smaller. So right there, international is 4.3%, and then 2 or more races is 6%. So we start there, 2 or more races, then Hispanic, Black, and white. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 categories are more than 5%. All right, now suppose we were told that capital N equals 540505. What does that mean? Now remember from section 1.1, capital N means the population size, as opposed to little n, which is a sample size. So that means that, and this would be treating that year as if its own population, 2024. So the NCAA athletes in 2024. So this number must be how many there were. So there were 540,505 total NCAA athletes. Oops, in 2024, right? It's treating that year as a population. Right, the NCAA athletes in 2024 is a population unto itself. Okay, so there are 540,505 total NCAA athletes in 2024. Now, how many of them were white? Round to a whole number. Okay, so we know it was 61.4%. So we know this is the total. So what we want to do is we want to take 61.4% of 540,505. Now the way to do that mathematically is to multiply. And we don't use percents for mathematics. We use percents for talking, right? So we say, hey, 61.4% of the NCAA athletes that year were white. Okay, but how many is that, right? So that's how we speak about the total or the percentage of the total. But that's not how we would do it. So to do this, we would actually multiply the decimal. So you'd have to turn this into a decimal, right? Make it a decimal. Okay, so to do that, you move the decimal from where it is, because it's a percent, 2 spots to the left, 1, 2, and it becomes 0.614 times 540,505. Now, timesing can be done with a dot, or you could use parentheses, or both, right? So some instructors use parentheses a lot, sometimes instructors use a times dot a lot, either way. Just to notice, to make this a decimal, you move the decimal, move the point 2 spots left, right? To make it from a percent to a decimal. Right, from a percent to a decimal, move the decimal point 2 spots to the left. Okay, so we have our decimal, right here, times our total, and we would get a number. All right, so let's see here. If I go to Desmos, I can do this with percentages, with parentheses, 0.614, parentheses 540,505, or I could take 0.614, times 540505 or both, right? It doesn't really matter, right? Either use this dot to represent multiplication or parentheses to represent multiplication. Or you could put a dot in between them. That's also fine. The dot, by the way, I'm getting from above the 8. So above your 8 on your keyboard, there's a little star, and that's the multiplication. You can also pull up the keypad, and it's right there. It looks like an X, but it's not an X. It's multiply right there. It'll look like a dot when you put it in there. Okay, so we get 331870, and we're going to round that to the nearest whole number because, of course, these are people. These are athletes. Oops, I've already forgotten the number. Let me go back. 331870.07. And to round that, we would just round, right? Look to the right of the decimal point. This is low. This is 0. So this is 331870. In this case, it was white athletes, NCAA athletes.